Hello, my name is Erica Cushmore, and this podcast is going to go over student leader learning outcomes. One of the reasons I chose this topic is because I work really closely with a few different student organizations on campus, primarily student ambassadors, as well as our orientation leaders, as part of my role as the outreach manager at Lone Star College. This is an area that I've actually struggled with quite a bit because it's been difficult to separate myself from being a student supervisor, to also being an advisor, and making sure that they're not just completing everything that they need to do as an employee, but also as a student and a student leader and somebody who's also looking to get a little bit more out of the college process than just being a student worker. So that is why I chose this topic. It was very applicable to the work that I do in my own position. So to give you a little bit of an idea um, of the Student Leader Learning Outcomes Project, this Student Leader Learning Outcomes Project provides a universal methods and tools for staff throughout Texas A&M University to use with student leaders in student organizations, programs, or activities to help in the assessment and documentation of enhanced learning in relation to students' leadership experience. So this is taken directly from the Texas A&M website that talks specifically about the student leader learning outcomes. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this was developed. So it was first introduced at Texas A&M by the Division of Student Affairs. Essentially, it provides both learning outcomes as well as a rubric for assessment on 15 different content areas. So it's telling you from a specific student organization or student involvement area, these are the anticipated learning outcomes, and here's a rubric for how either a student leader or an advisor of that student organizations would go about assessing and using that rubric to make sure that these outcomes are actually achieved. It assures that student learning is being evaluated in co-curricular environments and not just within the classroom setting. We're so used to assessment and accreditation applying to specifically the classroom environment and looking at what students are learning in the classroom, but the Student Leader Learning Outcomes Project really focuses on what students are learning outside of the classroom as well and in their student involvement activities. And this project was recognized by NASPA. So granted, it was first introduced at Texas A&M, but this is something that can be applied to all institutions and really used as a guideline for any student affairs work that you might do at any other institution. So as I mentioned, the 15 content areas that the Student Leader Learning Outcomes Project focuses on are listed here. So whatever you're looking to measure in your student organization, you could refer to one of these outcomes, and it'll show you the outcomes. This is all listed on the website, which is listed in my reference page. But you could choose any of these, and it'll not just provide you with the outcomes, but it'll also provide you with the rubrics. And on this next slide is an example. So for instance, one of the content areas was fiscal responsibility. As you can see here, it really gives you a really good rubric to measure these kind of things, and explains what students are looking to do in that specific content area. So some of the additional research that I did in regards to this particular area, Kinsey 2018 talks a lot about how accreditation specifically is usually looking at what happens within the classroom, but accreditation and assessment should really go hand in hand. So when accreditors are coming out to look at different programs, they should really be taking a close look at these student learning co-curricular outcomes as well, because those are important to the whole learning process as well. And the collaboration really needs to happen both in a curricular setting and a co-curricular setting as well. Learning outcomes should align with institutional missions. The good thing about the student leader learning outcomes is even if an institution doesn't have a rubric or something like this in place, the work that Texas A&M did has really set a good foundation and a good guideline. And if an institution is looking to come up with their own sort of methods and their own sort of assessment to measure these sorts of things, all institutions have some sort of mission or vision, and so they should really have a really good idea of what they're looking to measure just based on the already established parameters of the mission of the institution. Advisors and student leaders should collaborate in ways that allows both parties to learn and grow. So Breslin, Cope, Otakik, and Sharp discuss how student leaders are very important to the overall college education process, and advisors should view student leaders and peer mentors, things along those lines, really as colleagues in the learning process. So they are not just teaching the students, but the students are helping faculty members and advisors grow, because ultimately we can all learn from each other. And this student leader learning outcomes project really helps to allow those things to happen, because the rubrics don't necessarily have to be just used by the advisors, but student leaders, so like a club president or club vice president, can also use these rubrics to analyze their own leadership skills as well as those within their organization. So a few different opportunities for applications. One of the areas that I thought would be really helpful is it would assist higher education staff members that are new to the profession. This was really eye-opening for me. I know a lot of people that get involved in higher education as a profession were very involved as students, so some of this stuff isn't necessarily new information to them and they can transition pretty easily. I wasn't one of those students. I wasn't particularly involved, so a lot of the things that I've had to learn about student leadership have really been just playing it by ear and learning on the job. So I think these rubrics would be helpful to somebody that is new in their position and new to the profession, or somebody that themselves wasn't necessarily involved in student leadership roles when they were going through their college experience. It also provides documentation of learning outcomes to important stakeholders. So we hear it all the time in student affairs. Everyone thinks that we just throw pizza parties and have a good time. And while those things are true to an extent, it is really important that we show that we are documenting learning outcomes and showing that the work that we do is important and it does require funding, and it is very important to the university's mission. And it also helps to use these rubrics that Texas A&M has provided to create additional rubrics that are going to be specific to your institution. So they've done a really great job at coming up with these 15 content areas. But if there is something that you would like to measure at your institution that is not covered in these 15, you can certainly use these as like a template to create something that's applicable to your own institution. So just some additional resources. A lot of the information that I pulled about student leader learning outcomes was obviously from the Division of Student Affairs website at Texas A&M, because they were the ones who initiated this. But some other resources, student leader learning outcomes at Texas A&M has a Facebook page, and they post a lot of really relevant articles from Inside Higher Ed, Chronicles of Higher Education, that are really specific and pertinent to this topic as well. Also, if you are looking to incorporate any of these practices into anything that your students are involved in, I would check out the National Conference on Student Leadership, because this is going to go off a lot of what these rubrics and these learning outcomes have discussed as part of this project. So here's a list of references that I used. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night.